You are listening to A Taymore Deception, written by Peter Hartford and Emily Symank. Audio by 11 Lamps. Welcome to the journey.
Prologue. Captain Thorne gazed off into the open sky surrounding the airship, a light breeze ruffling his hair. They were encompassed by a sea of sky above, below, and at each of the cardinal points. There were only a few clouds to break up the endless blue, and the only land in sight was a single dot in the far distance, their destination. The Taymore colony was Captain Thorne's new assignment after the conclusion of the Abristan Civil War. Above them, the sky was lit by 7 bright stars. It was the spiritual energy of those stars that held the atmosphere in place, along with the fragments of land known as Terry. The known world had become like this millennia ago in an event known as the Shattering. Only legends remained of how the once spherical world had exploded into the thousands of the island-like Terry Thorne was so familiar with today. Some claimed the stars were gods that had protected life from annihilation on that fateful day, and it was no great stretch. Scholars believe that without those 7 stars, the Terra, breathable air, and everything else they knew would be sucked out into oblivion. In addition to this, the 7 stars provided life energy known as adustum to vitalize every living thing in their world. To say they were gods, or bringers of life, was entirely reasonable. Thorne ran his fingers through his hair and dropped a loose strand into the air off the bow. He watched it swirl as it fluttered into the sky below. Though no one could say for sure what happened to objects that fell into the sky between Terras, it was clear they would fall for a very long time, perhaps indefinitely. By extension, it was believed that airship sailors who fell overboard continued to fall at terminal velocity until they eventually died of thirst. Not a comforting thought. After 12 days on this airship, Thorne couldn't wait to be back on solid ground. The trip from the neighboring Terra of Diller should have taken 2 to 3 days. However, their airship had been caught in a sky squall which had blown them badly off course and left them floundering around in high winds for days. The crew seemed equally as restless as Thorne was. They hooted and hollered excitedly as they gambled over the last piece of fresh produce. The group momentarily held their breath as the clattering of dice trickled across the airship's cracked floorboards. The silence was quickly broken by groans of disappointment and cheers of success. One of the crew members leapt to his feet and practically danced as he announced his victory. The prize, a banana. With a roll of his eyes, Thorne turned to the blank canvas of sky. His gaze soon narrowed with interest. The single speck of land had been accompanied by several soft blobs a great distance off. The uninitiated might assume sky travel to be monotonous and dull. To the contrary, many dangers lurked in the seemingly empty skies. In addition to the threat of the ship being damaged in a bad storm, the empty void was home to innumerable varieties of monsters. Yet another side effect of the Shattering had been the proliferation of monster species, born from the sudden release of so much ethereal power. Among many others, the Shattering had been the dawn of a group of beings known as shadows. No one knew their exact origin, though there were many theories. Some claimed they had arisen as a result of high adustum energy levels in the atmosphere at the time. Others thought the force of the Shattering opened a rift to another dimension. Since shadows' bodies were primarily composed of corrupted adustum energy, all these theories seemed plausible enough. In any case, shadows were notoriously dangerous and immediately began to clash with the inhabitants of the newly formed world. Since then, the various power struggles between mortals, shadows, and deities had given rise to even more monster species as they were created as pawns. One such notable struggle, the Battle of the Skies, was a fabled war to replace the sky god Nebo as head deity after his death. In Thorne's opinion, one of the more unfortunate outcomes of this war was that it temporarily distracted the other gods from Eris, the goddess of chaos. It was during this time that Eris announced that it was unfair for birds to have such a monopoly on the skies. She proceeded to give the power of flight to creatures that never should have possessed that ability, sea creatures. Though this was all stories and hearsay, Thorne couldn't help but think a goddess of chaos must have been involved as he watched the bloated abominations floating towards them. The blobs had come into focus to reveal a pod of humming sky whales. In a horrible bastardization of nature, these creatures had been forced to trade their blubber for gasoblasts, cells that accumulated lightweight star gases and enabled the beings to float. Though they were gentle creatures, no one wanted damage to the ship from an overly playful sky whale calf, or a bull wanting to remove its sky barnacles. In a word, they were bad news. Thorn turned to warn the crew about the impending pod, but he needn't have worried. The sailors were already staring in horror at the approaching beasts. One crew member was so shocked that he dropped the last banana, its yellow form disappearing forever into the abyss below the ship. "Control stations, everyone," a sailor called out as the crew members scattered. The ship soon lurched as the engine's force was redirected. Thorn squinted at the rapidly approaching blobs. Something was off. The creatures seemed to be moving uncharacteristically quickly. His vision swept past the whales and landed on an even more terrifying creature, its many squirming tentacles trailing behind. He squeezed his eyes shut and groaned internally before opening them again. Curse Ares! They were only hours away from their destination, and they had to run into this. With one hand touching the hilt of his sword, Thorn ran toward the handful of other soldiers who were traveling with him on the airship. "Battle stations! We have incoming! There's a sky kraken! Load the cannons!" The body of the first whale crashed into the airship, sending it spinning in dangerous circles. A second sky mammal contacted the ship's rudder, causing a loud crunching of wood. Thorn gripped a railing tightly. At this rate, they would be done for by the time the real threat even arrived. A dark gray calf whipped overhead, its tail beating the air, propelling its buoyant little body forward. The sight made Thorn duck reflexively. He felt like he needed two giant traffic sticks to signal the crazed beast to go around. Another enormous whale was headed straight for the sky ship. Just as Thorn was bracing for impact, the creature let out a squeal of terror as it was lifted upward by a giant tentacled arm. The whale thrashed and bucked as it struggled to free itself. A second tentacle shot toward it, but not before the sky mammal squirmed free with heroic effort. Only some scattered cloud was left in its wake as it dashed away. One win for the whale, one big loss for the airship. The tentacle that was meant for the fleeing whale now smashed into the deck, sending little bits of cracked wood flying into the air. Sailors and soldiers alike yelled in fright as a disorganized barrage of cannonballs boomed from the hatches. A particularly unlucky sailor was swept clear over the side of the ship, his cries slowly fading away as he fell. Only a single cannonball managed to make contact with the giant sky kraken, making it recoil in surprise. The disorientation was only temporary, however, and it quickly noticed the new little snacks running around on the ship. Thorn ducked just in time to dodge a tentacle wider than his body. The ship swung back and forth wildly in the beast's grasp, making every step difficult. Rookie cannon handling. Seasoned airship sailors would have taken the beast out before it had the chance to get the ship in its clutches. Now they were in trouble. Panicked cries erupted from behind him as one of the soldiers was lifted into the air. Thorn's sword was immediately in his hand as he ran full speed toward his fellow soldier. Kicking off the deck, he bounced off the side of a mast to gain vertical distance before landing a slash on the impossibly large tentacle. The blow only made it about halfway through before his sword got stuck in the heavy cartilage. Fortunately, this was just enough to cause the kraken to loosen its hold on the captured soldier, and he fell to the deck with a resounding thud. Another round of cannon fire blasted at the giant tentacled beast. This time, the artillery squad had gotten their shit together and managed to time their shots to when the wildly spinning ship was approximately in line with the target. Several more cannonballs connected with the kraken, and it ground its beak in anger. Most monster species were not known for their exceptional intelligence, so rather than releasing the ship, it smashed its tentacles down like a child having a tantrum. Not one to waste such an opportunity, Thorn lunged forward to slash a nearby tentacle, tattering it like a rag. By now, the ship's deck was an obstacle course, with crushed chunks of board twisting up like pointed speed bumps. He nearly sprained an ankle as he stepped backward to avoid a thrashing tentacle. Then he was thrown sideways as the ship was swung through the air in the opposite direction. I hope those cannon monkeys are paying attention. With a silent prayer on his lips, Thorn watched the shape of the sky kraken grow larger as the ship swept toward it again. The beast was oblivious to the impending danger. It left the cannon-lined side of the ship nicely aligned with its body, as it wiggled a tentacle through a window hatch in search of a hapless sailor. A man's screams echoed out of the hold as pots and pans clattered. "Come on. A round of drinks? No 10 rounds, if you can take this thing out right here and now." Thorn held his breath as a volley of cannon fire left the airship's side. In the next moment, he wanted to cover his face. How was it possible to not land every cannonball with a shot like that? A dismal half of the ammunition hit payday, while the rest spun uselessly off into the open void. Were the soldiers manning the artillery newborn recruits or what? As a veteran who had just served 4 years during the Civil War, the sight of this gave Thorn a headache. The cannon shots that had managed to hit still greatly slowed the Kraken. It sluggishly retracted several of its tentacles to shield its pained body. However, the creature still stupidly gave no indication it would back off. The airship couldn't take much more of this. If the battering continued, they would all be joining the unfortunate sailor from earlier and fall into the void. It was time to end this. He made a quick inventory of the tools at his disposal. Having grown up in the outer colonies, he had become familiar with many of the monster species that frequented these remote areas. Knowing the weaknesses of one's enemy was one giant step toward winning the battle. A barrel painted with a bright yellow triangle caught his eye. He recognized it as a keg of roof tar. Giant squid were a species blessed and cursed with an uncanny sense of taste, literally 1,000 times stronger than that of a human. As odd as it sounded, squid could also pick up taste directly through their tentacles. This allowed them to feel out tasty sailors hiding below decks, while also making them vulnerable to what Thorn was about to do. Using the tip of his sword, he hurriedly sliced the ropes binding the barrel to the deck. The moment he had gotten it loose, the ship bobbed crazily in the air, sending him to the ground. The barrel, which now rolled freely on the deck, smashed on top of him. This was not going according to plan. Scrambling to his feet, Thorn steadied the barrel with both hands. He looked up in time to see a tentacle sweeping toward him, a full 30 seconds earlier than planned. A curse escaped his lips as the tentacle wrapped around his body, hoisting both him and the barrel into the air. He had gotten his secret weapon within range of the target. The problem was, said secret weapon was still encased inside the barrel. Furthermore, the hand that was holding his sword was now pinned to his side. Clinging to determination, he kicked at the barrel with one foot. If he couldn't cut it open, then he would kick it open. A sudden jolt of the squid's tentacle disoriented him. Against his better judgment, he stole a quick glance at the deck of the ship. He had better get this keg open before he got too far away. To his immediate dismay, he realized he was no longer over the deck. He was facing the side lined with cannons ready to fire. Oh no, no, no. His eyes closed in the momentary stillness. He was about to be blasted away with friendly fire by a bunch of recruits who were green enough that one could lose them in a garden. The blast from the cannons was so loud it made his head rattle. Something wet and sticky splattered on his face. After waiting for a few cautious seconds, he opened his eyes. Black goop coated his body, and the tentacles waving around him. Those silly new recruits had accidentally managed to nick the barrel by sheer chance. He couldn't help but laugh until the tentacle that was holding him shot through the air as if it had suddenly realized it was holding poo. His body crashed into the deck of the ship so hard his vision darkened. The last thing he saw was the contorting form of a giant sky kraken, doing a crazed wiggle dance in the air, before his world turned to black. It was growing dark outside when Captain Thorn finally returned to consciousness, and the airship was still limping to land. Looking down, he could make out the shape of the Taymore colony. It was a postage stamp-sized outpost, constructed for the sole purpose of mining firestone from the Terra. The population couldn't be more than 1,000 in total. He estimated he could walk from one end of the colony to the other in a single recitation of the Ebriston national anthem. 4 brightly glowing towers surrounded the colony, with a 5th in the center. A half-sphere of protective energy emanated from the towers, its light blue glow a welcome sight in the dimming sky. Many of the outer colonies used such protective shields. Gazing at this one brought back fond memories from his childhood in a similar outpost. He randomly remembered how as a teenager he used to exit the protective shield to help trap the grosswings that pestered trade routes. A common monster variety in the outer terrace, grosswings were reminiscent of human-sized bats with crocodile snouts and a vicious disposition. Fortunately, grosswings had the fierceness of a tiger, but the brains of a sheep. It forever amazed him how easy they were to trap. They never wised up, even when the same tactics were used year after year. Eyes misting over, he let out a long sigh. All of that had been what felt like a lifetime ago, before he had joined the military at the ripe old age of 17. It was before he had spent 4 years fighting in the Ebriston Civil War, on the losing side, as fate would have it. Taymore was his first long-term assignment after the restructuring following the war. He wanted to stand up to get a better look, but pain shot through his body as soon as he tried to move. That fall had been quite hard, and everything ached in the aftermath. He chose instead to lean against a railing and watch their gradual approach from a seated position.
Laura, on another airship somewhere in the sky between terras. Laura peeked out from between two boards of her shipping crate. A soft glow of moonlight shone on the wooden deck of the airship, revealing stacks and stacks of shipping containers that did not fit inside the ship's cargo hold. She let out a breath upon noting the absence of any crew members or ruffians. It had been close to 3 weeks since she had seen her home on the Ebriston main terra. Through no fault of her own, she had woken up inside a shipping container, which she soon learned was on an airship flying deep within the void. The question of who had put her in this shipping container remained a mystery. Her fingers traced the former location of her missing money pouch. Her foremost theory was that a gang had found her napping near the airship docks and stuffed her into the crate to prevent her from retaliating after they stole her coin. The second possibility was one that made her shiver with apprehension. Given the duration of the ship's flight without any sign of land, it could only be headed far from the civilization of Ebriston's main terra. What was the one reason for a young woman to be stolen from her home and sent to some distant colony? She clenched her fists involuntarily. A full 90% of the slave trade was controlled by the neighboring country of Invicti. As might be expected of a country that had based its national economy in the slave trade, the Invicti had slaving down to a science. The majority of their inventory came from primitive civilizations in the outer terras. However, it was a little spoken of fact that local gangs sometimes carted kidnap victims to their slave-trading neighbors for a handsome profit. It was for this blood-chilling reason that she had remained hidden from the airship sailors. They were doubtless in on the scheme. As long as she stayed out of sight and out of mind, she could avoid the risk of other abuses. With this in mind, she restricted herself to only venturing from her trusty crate at night, when the number of crew on duty was lowest. She slipped outside and tiptoed over to another pile of crates. There were a lot of preserved foods of various kinds, as well as jugs of water for the crew. Laura picked out a few tins and took a long swallow of water. She wanted to pour it over her gross hair to get clean, but she was afraid using too much would draw attention. Her mind went back to her last normal day before she was kidnapped. She had gone to work at the bakery where she was apprenticing 3 hours before dawn. It had been a boringly normal day. She had gotten into an argument with Adriana, one of the other town girls who had been her rival for the apprenticeship. After that, one of the lead bakers had sent her to pick up supplies at the airship docks. An ache filled her chest as she remembered meeting her mother for lunch. Her mother had been nagging her about a general's son she was trying to set her up with. Laura had brushed it off, once again, and paid little attention to the conversation. If only she had known at the time that it might very well be her last conversation with her mother. Her vision blurred as a sad smile tugged at her lips. Unceasing in her efforts to set her daughter up with some rich suitor, Mother had never truly appreciated her potential to rise in the culinary world. Now, that dream seemed like a wisp of smoke blown away by the wind. With a long sigh, she hauled the various tins and dry rations back to her temporary home and prepared a charcuterie board of preserved meats and sea biscuits.
Thank you for listening to A Taymore Deception. Tune in every Wednesday for new chapters.